Massachusetts as the Director of Intercultural Learning and Land-Based Programs. She's been working with Rachel's Table Western Mass since March 2021. She has worked in the fields of secular and Jewish land-based education for over 20 years, specializing in youth and young adult leadership development, summer camp management, program development, and intercultural/interfaith learning. This is Kara's fourth August Symposium. You guys could have used it on the bingo.
Third. I miscounted.
It's her third then. Kara will share how our private group Gleans with youth, students, agency clients, cooperative sponsors, and more help us reach our goals around food access and equity, community engagement, and intercultural connections and funding. So I'm going to give it to Kara. I would recommend holding it a little closer than the last group did. It's a little bit, works a little bit.
Just let me know if I'm not close enough. Okay, Rachel's Table of Western Massachusetts. I'm going to start out by giving you a little bit of a background of who we are as an organization and the scope of what we do, just to give you a context of where our Gleaning program fits into the whole of us as an organization. From ancient roots, we grow fertile solutions. We are an organization with culturally Jewish roots that works across faiths and cultures, both within our staff and with our food donors, with agencies, and we serve with volunteers we work with. We've existed for 33 years, the first 31 of which were as a program of the Jewish Federation of Western Massachusetts. We became an independent nonprofit in July of 2023. And so we are in many ways old and established with decades-long relationships, and also fledgling, flying from the nest and learning who we are and articulating who we are in different ways. And our Gleaning program has actually been one of the ways that personally I find us actually learning more about who we are and how we can serve better. We run 4 main programs. We rescue, we purchase, we glean, and we grow. Our rescue program is our longest and oldest program. That's what Rachel's Table primarily did for all of its existence. It was founded as a rescue program. Our Gleaning program started in 2007. Our purchase program is the smallest of our programs, and really happens at a few key points in the year when agencies we work with need particular types of food or just larger quantities of food. And our Growing Gardens program, which I also oversee directly, as well as Gleaning, works directly with agency clients to support folks in growing food that they want to be grown for themselves and their families and communities. And we like this infographic because we think of the work we do as being on a spectrum of crisis response to long-term solutions. If what we're trying to do is provide people a hot meal today, rescue is a great solution to that. If what we're trying to do is support people in providing their own meal for themselves and their families tomorrow, moving along the spectrum towards growing is a better way to do that. And so we focus across that spectrum through our programs. And we are heavily volunteer driven. We've got over 350 active volunteers right now. Over 350 active volunteers right now. Do I need to repeat anything that I said before or just keep going at this volume? Great. Next slide. Each of our programs, I'm not going to read through all of these pieces, but just to give you a little more of a taste and image of our different programs in action. We rescue approximately 75,000 pounds of food per month. We just recently bought a box truck and a refrigerated van about a year and a half ago. Those numbers, somewhere around 850,000 pounds last year of rescue food. That's up from 300-something thousand pounds just a few years ago. So we've been in a really huge growth period over the last few years. Our Gleaning program, which I will go into in depth, but just a few key points here. It began in 2007 and has grown exponentially since 2021. We've got 3 volunteers from our program here at the Symposium this week, folks who have been really keen and committed to being here with us. So you might have met Leda or Jill or Mike, and also Sarah Bluestein, our open community Gleaning coordinator is here. And this is the first year that I've been at the symposium with other people from Rachel's Table, in part because that's where we're at in the growth of our program and what makes sense, and in part because I'm in the Northeast, and I appreciate that. Yeah, keep going for now. Our Growing Gardens program, we work with approximately 12 partner agencies to support them in planning, planting, and harvesting their own food. We work with little ones, we work with elders, and everything from teaching children healthy lifestyle habits and growing their own food to supporting socialization of seniors and elders in our community. We provide bilingual educational resources through partnering with other organizations, cooking demos, all sorts of things. And we have a heavy youth engagement presence. Our team board is the leading edge of that. It's a peer-led group of teens, high schoolers primarily. They function with a board kind of structure, the president, vice president, etc. And they work to educate themselves and their peers about food insecurity in Western Massachusetts and do meaningful social action projects in the area. And this art piece here was from an Arts Fest submission a few years ago, where the teens create curriculum about food security that gets distributed to art teachers around the area. And those teachers then lead their students in creating art projects that represent their learning about food security. And this is just one example that I wrote about. Okay, so we get to gleaning in depth. As I said, our gleaning program started in 2007. These graphs start in 2021 because that's where the growth and evolution and the change in our gleaning program really kicked in. Prior to 2021, the stats are going to be pretty similar to 2021, somewhere between 2021 and 2022. The pandemic threw a wrench in things. There were some staffing changes. I came on in 2021, and now we've been kind of in this new era. And we hired Sarah Bluestein in 2023. So you can see that there's just been some very steady growth. The reason for this is because we started an open community gleaning program, which is pretty similar to what most gleaning programs do, which is that anyone can come glean. You sign up, anyone who wants to come glean, right? Is that what most people do? That is not what we did for the majority of our gleaning history. We just started that. We piloted it in 2022. We got a big USDA grant. 3-year grant that allowed us that fall to run just 4 pilot programs. They were very successful. We said, great, let's scale this up. Hired Sarah, and this is what's been happening through building out a more typical gleaning program like this network is. I don't know before. Also through this growth period, you can see the number of volunteers growing in 2021. So that was all volunteers in what we call our private group gleaning, which I will get to in a moment. So this growth from really around 120 or so people to almost 300 people and growing. We have over 400 people on our gleaning list. That is because of our open community gleaning program. And our delivery sites, not only are the number of sites growing in terms of our formal program partners that we're delivering to, but our distribution has grown dramatically as well because of the way leaders themselves are ambassadors and agents in their communities, getting food to precisely where it needs to go. It's that free food for that neighbor, to that elder, to that injured person, to that disabled person, to wherever it needs to go. Leaders are getting it there. So this graph on the right represents formal distribution sites, but we have a lot of other ways of presenting those informal distribution networks that are also extremely important. Here we have, I'm going to start on the right. So this breakdown of private group gleans and open community gleans. Actually, let's go to the next slide for a minute and then I'll. So what are private group gleans? From 2007 to 2021, the model that existed for gleaning, the way it was founded at Rachel's Table, was that groups, usually of religious school youth groups or Sunday schools, Jewish day schools, and scouts would come out to glean. And they would have kind of an educational program. There was some curriculum around it. They would learn about food insecurity in the area. They would learn about food pantries. They would harvest some food. They would deliver it. They'd maybe get a quick tour of the facility or meet a staff member. And that was that. And that was actually my introduction to gleaning when I was running one of those youth groups for a local synagogue many years ago. Those teens went out gleaning. That was one of the things I inherited in the program. I was like, cool, go gleaning. That's how I first learned about Rachel's Table and the gleaning program. And there was great value to that model. Exposure is important. For people to want to engage in a problem, they need to know it's there. And I think that the educational focus had a lot of benefit in terms of the way it invited participants to think from faith perspectives and service perspectives in a way that was connected to the rest of their lives. Those were the positives from that model. There were also problems that I saw with that model. One of the problems was that we didn't harvest that much food. If you think back to that other slide, it was about 6,500 pounds. And the highest number of pounds that I found in any of the research I did, which there wasn't really specific data for all of those years of history, but there was enough data for me to kind of put together a picture. There were a couple years that were around 16 to 18,000 pounds of food. Most years were between 8 and 10,000 pounds of food. And then it went down a bit around the pandemic because of challenges bringing people together in places. And so we were starting to build it back up. But if we're talking an average of about 8 to 10,000 pounds of food per year for the effort of facilitating all of these groups, we're not actually getting that much food to people who need it. So, okay, let's keep figuring out a way to do groups, but let's also get more food to people who need it. That's why we started the Open Community Cleaning Program. Other issues with the old model. It felt increasingly voyeuristic to me to bring groups of young people who primarily have not had a lived experience of food insecurity, into spaces where, yes, the exposure piece is important, but it felt like we were like doing a kind of like peep into like people's lives who were in a rough way. And there was something that didn't feel good to me about that. Sometimes it was fine. Sometimes it didn't feel good. And it's hard to put the exact pin on what doesn't feel right, but I also have to trust myself that sometimes it didn't feel right. Meanwhile, all of these group gleans were happening on Sundays because that's when youth groups are available. And that meant that agency staff who don't normally work on Sundays would need to be there at the agency to meet us and spend their time showing us around or even just being able to receive the food. And that was becoming more and more of a burden to them, particularly after the pandemic. I think for many years, since that 2007 era, there were partnerships with certain agencies and it went well and it was not a burden. But the pandemic changed things and it became more of a burden. And so I wanted to shift the burden. I wanted to harvest more food. I wanted to bring people into exposure, not in a way that was just kind of a peep in and then see ya, but actually more of a long-term relationship with this work and with the issues in our communities. That brought us to where we're at now in our private group gleaning program. Slide. So now what we've got is I run about somewhere between 10 and 20 private group gleans per year. Sarah runs our open community gleaning. I run our private group gleans. Many of those gleans, if I say 20, a lot of them are actually the same group of students who come every week during their fall semester of school. But these private group gleans are all different groups of people in the community who have a stake in building a long-term relationship with the communities they live in. And also some of them are people who are impacted by food insecurity. Some of them are companies and businesses. But the basic breakdown here shows you how our numbers of group gleans. I guess this doesn't show you that much trend, and I don't think it only includes one of those Deerfield Academy glean days, like as one group, not as multiple gleans. But so this number 8, 8, 7, 12, probably rising up to more like 18 this coming year is my guess. And this private group gleaning model is our way of continuing the education, continuing the exposure, continuing the long-term investment in the community, while also getting a lot of food to a lot of people. Something that Kathy, during our census interview, wanted me to highlight was this age distribution chart, because she said it's not very common to have so many people in the 35 to 50 range coming out on gleans. That's because of our private group gleaning. We do have a lot of open community gleaners in that age range as well. But that number I think is particularly high, as well as the 14 to 22, because we do a lot of student and youth programs. So that's where that age distribution comes in. So who comes out on these Gleans? One group of people is educators and healthcare professionals. I've got a group from the Behavioral Health Network coming out this fall. They are professionals who work with adults with developmental disabilities and mental health challenges. They're coming out as a network of professionals to learn how gleaning can fit and how food and diet in general can also fit into mental health and supportive lifestyles for the clients they serve. This particular photo is of a group of educators who, oh, I didn't tell you an important thing. Let's go back. Yeah, this slide. So there's who comes out to Gleans and there's what are really our kind of refreshed goals. So I just want to dial that in. I wanted to avoid the issues from the 2007 to 2021 era, check. Additionally, as an organization, part of our goals overall across all our programs are building interfaith and intercultural community, having sustainable funding sources, having direct participation by people who experience food insecurity, and engaging community members in long-term food system repair. So when I'm looking at building a schedule for private group Gleans, I'm looking at those goals of our organization and saying, does this Glean fit? And not all groups get a private group Glean. We just don't have enough Sundays to bring every scout group out. We don't have enough staff to have every group who wants to come out. So this is my rubric of where do we put our finite resources towards group Gleans. We can go one back. So we've got the healthcare professionals, and then with educators, I'll say this is a crew from a campus. So there's an organization called Abundance Farm, which is it's in Northampton, Massachusetts, and it's a Jewish educational and social justice community farm. It's in partnership with a synagogue that's right there on the campus, also in partnership with a Jewish day school right there across the parking lot, also in partnership with the Northampton Survival Center across the parking lot. So all of those organizations are working together to create this community farm that provides space and access to healthy food for a variety of people. And one of the outdoor director there and I had this vision of revolutionizing Jewish education in the community. And it's already an area that has a strong focus on local food and ecology and living in balance on this planet. But we want to even further kind of revolutionize how are we building those values into the ethos of Jewish education so that programs like Gleaning aren't a one-time thing that students might do, but actually a practice that they might know is just something, it might be just something they do with their family or something they choose to do, for example, as a volunteer service project, and like even creating a Glean team, developing a relationship with a local agency. So this was a group of educators combined from those different campus organizations that we brought out to be moving towards that vision. We brought our own staff out this year. Not all our staff had been on a Glean before. And we also brought them out at the same time with the staff from an organization called CISA, Communities Involved in Sustaining Agriculture. CISA works across policy, technical assistance, all sorts of work with local farmers across Massachusetts. CISA reached out to us wanting to come on a Glean so that they could understand more of what we were doing and how to collaborate as organizations in the same sphere. And we took that as an opportunity for our staff to come out as well, both to learn more about us and to connect more deeply with CISA. And we have had many fruits of that intercollegial collaboration, just this event. Many collaborative fruits come out of that over the past year. Got agency clients. This is a group of moms and their kids from one of the agencies also in our Growing Gardens program. We're also partners through our rescue and purchase programs. These are folks who have come out of domestic violence situations, and healthy food is part of their program and part of the lifestyle habits that they're working to build. So they come out Gleaning with us each year. They have an awesome time, and then they do cooking classes with the food. They go home, they grow food. It's all connected into the long term of of their own trajectory on building healthy and safe lives. More photos of clients. Another agency we work with, Jewish Family Service, works with immigrants and refugees. So here are a few folks out from different places. Eggplants and sweet potatoes were pretty exciting. We work with a lot of students and youth groups. This is the Deerfield Academy crew. So each fall, they come out every Thursday. And now that they've been coming out with us, so they finish their season each year going to one of our partners, Stone Soup Cafe, which is an amazing community meal program that serves about 600 meals every Saturday. We don't live in big cities. Like, I didn't situate you in Western Massachusetts if you don't know what I'm talking about. It's not a big city area. It's like 600 meals in a semi-rural place is a lot. So these students come out gleaning every Thursday, and now one of the faculty members who's been coming out gleaning for a couple of years, she now brings, I should also say, after gleaning on the final day of gleaning in the fall, because it's in November, it's dark at 4, so we don't glean, we actually go to Stone Soup and they help prepare produce they gleaned for a meal. One of the faculty members who's been coming out for that program for a couple of years, now in a different semester, takes her students to Stone Soup Cafe. So, and I've had students also from those classes or from that group. It's sort of like a global service group that students opt into, do photojournalism essays and research for other classes on hunger and food insecurity in Franklin County. So these students are not necessarily from the area. Some of them are, but they're from all over the world. And through just coming out gleaning with us, they're now having all of these different touch points with other of our community partners and expanding their own knowledge and learning through other classes in their own interdisciplinary pursuits. And lastly, we've got corporate donors. We bring banks out, we bring businesses out, we have sponsored gleaning days. These are days where the folks who give us $10,000 or more get given a sponsored gleaning day. And we generally combine companies so that they're kind of meeting some folks from other businesses. They're seeing who else is invested in this work. I've now been going out on these sponsored gleaning days with handfuls of folks for multiple years in a row. And seeing the questions they ask change, seeing the ways that they volunteer in their communities change, and seeing their investment level in this work change. This particular photo of folks, Westfield Bank, this is the senior C-suite staff spending a whole afternoon coming out and gleaning with us. And they're a strong supporter of us now. And I feel like when you've got a banker who at the end of the day is like, as far as that goal of sustainable funding and long-term engagement in community resources, I think we're accomplishing that together. Yeah, how are these gleans different from open community gleans? So I've said some of this already, or maybe I haven't said these things actually. Good, and I'll make these slides. Community or private group gleans, there's more people pleasing, right? I'm not going to bring the bankers out to a slimy field of leeks. It's just not going to be fun. I'm going to take them to a pretty apple orchard on a beautiful fall day, and we're going to schedule a rain date. And that means that, if they're coming from their Westfield branch office, I'm not going to bring them all the way up to Greenfield. I have to bring them down to Enfield, which means then I need to coordinate with Sarah because she didn't do any group gleans there, or open community gleans rather, because I have a group and I need those apples to be there. It's a little annoying, but it's worth it. Yeah, and operationally, they also differ in that we use a different sign-up system. The one we use for open community gleans it doesn't make the same sense. Like many organizations, we have too many systems that we're using, and it all doesn't make sense. We're working on it, but for now, we still have kind of two different systems, and that makes for a little bit of headache, but also just kind of differentiation. And it means that you need different staff to understand different systems in different ways. So it's just kind of a different use of resources. We might provide transportation. We used to provide buses for those educational groups. That was part of the model I inherited. I didn't like it. I thought that was a terrible use of resources. Financial, fossil fuel, I didn't like it. So we don't do it anymore, except for agency clients. We will provide transportation via bus or van for agency clients. In general, there's just more complex communication and preparation. For an open community Gleans, like you got to give everyone the details, but a lot of people are coming out gleaning frequently. And so they know what to do. They know what to bring. They know what to expect. For private group Glean, often these folks have not been out before. And people don't read, right? So you have to send them information a lot of times. You have to make sure to bold the right things, tell the group leader, like, if nothing else, here's what you need to put in your memo that maybe they'll read a little more than mine. A little more of that. A little more budget because we provide snacks and water for some of these programs. And there's also the educational programming piece. So part of my time is also spent on developing educational materials and just program plans, depending on what the group is. Something I didn't mention before in terms of how we work with youth is that we do a lot of increasingly more interfaith programs. And that is both to accomplish that goal of building interfaith and intercultural community. Also, I have way more synagogue and church youth groups asking for gleaning programs than I can accommodate. And so now what I'm aiming for is to have 2 or 3 dates throughout the season where there's a sign up and it's open and anyone from any of those groups can attend. And my hope is that we can be building a kind of community of young people across faiths and schools who have this kind of place. I don't know if anyone here was involved in youth groups or things like that growing up, but I was. And summer camp also similarly has this thing where it's like, it's a different world, it's a different community of people where you get to be yourself in a different way. You feel a sense of belonging in a different way. It's different than your school. And so I don't know if that's going to be successful, but that's one of the seeds in my mind is, can we be building something like that through gleaning for young people in our community? Questions?
I always ask this, is everything there grown to be donated to Glean?
Is everything grown to be donated or gleaned?
Are you going to other?
Yes, we go to other farms. And we live in a very, very agriculturally rich area.
How do you organize dates with farmers? I find that to be challenging.
How do we organize dates with farmers? We text a lot. And once they get to know us, they say, hey, I've got this field of brassicas, L1, when we're on enough of good terms, I know exactly what that means. Other farmers, if it's newer relationships, it may take a little more of us reaching out, and even established farmers in the height of the season, they're not necessarily remembering to reach out. So if we haven't heard from Gideon in a while, we might think, I'm just like, hey, you got anything in the next week or two?
It's kind of a follow-up to that. So I am part of Uproot Colorado, and we're in Colorado, and we try to accommodate group private gleans, but the biggest challenge is like going, hey, we need 2 to 3 weeks notice. And it's like, it's not up to me to decide when the surplus is happening and if a farmer's going to call us, and we don't want to be putting more burden on farmers for our benefit, right? Like that's also not in our mission. So like our biggest hurdle that we're trying to like brainstorm is like, how do you, because we see the potential of like, our volunteer base, it's a way to do all the things you talk about, expand your volunteer, get better, donors, get people who don't typically go on farm. It's just, I think it's a great thing, but how do you do it when like gleaning is not a predictable thing? And so how are you doing that with these corporate companies? Are they just like turning on a dime in 3 days? Or like, are you picking a date and hoping they're served? Like, how does that work?
The question is, private groups need set dates.
Yeah.
Agriculture is not certain.
Right.
How do we balance that?
Yeah.
That goes back to that pickiness part where for those banks, it basically I have like 2 farms that I bring to banks. I bring them to an apple orchard where unless it's a bad apple year, I know there are going to be apples. And I know that if we don't go glean them in the week or 2 before in an open community glean, that there will be apples for us. The other farm I go to is another farm where I know there will be sweet potatoes. Westfield Bank, they're like, we literally want to roll first. We like getting dirty. I'm like, great, come out to the sweet potato field, especially if it's a drought year. We'll get plenty dusty. I know which farms I can count on. And so basically if I have, 3 to 5 groups with kind of a set date in a cluster, it's that puzzle piecing with Sarah where I know which farms I can call on. And there also may be times where I'll reach out to other farmers. and say, hey, I'm gonna have a couple groups during this month. Do you imagine that you may have some crops available? And then I just kind of have a sense of like, all right, Carrie might have this, Gideon might have that, Mike might have that, Ben will have that. They're my options. And some groups I put in rain dates and some I don't. Some groups, if your program gets rained out, your program gets rained out. Not the corporate groups, but lots of questions. Okay, we're gonna make a stack. So 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah.
So what?
Yes.
I actually have a million questions.
Could we ask questions into the mic?
We'll reach to that row at least, but that's might be a.
It's just, basically you were talking about the community gleanings and the private gleanings, and I can see the private gleanings being very specific for donors. But for agency clients, all the types of gleaning, have you ever tried to combine community gleaning with the private ones, with all its challenges?
I did try that once and I made myself the only staff person for it and I hated it because it was like, it was coordinating two very different things at the same time. So yes, they could be combined and I would say Sarah and I have successfully done it 1 or 2 other times since then. We don't do it that often, but we could. It's just kind of like, it's 2 different programs. Like if it's if it's a private group, we're doing more circling up and talking and having some sharing going on, or there might also be like an icebreaker. There's a community building. There's like a game that we're tossing a beat around and asking a question about food insecurity. And we're like doing that for a half hour before we go harvest food. Whereas for an open community glean, folks are coming to harvest food. So we've done it. We could play with it a little bit more, but it's more like it's 2 different things happening parallel at the same farm in the same field. They're still not exactly happening together. Most of the time we've done a little bit of hybrid, but that's why we keep them a little more separate.
Just, we didn't do it before, then we started doing it and they feed from each other.
Yeah.
Especially when we work with vulnerable people or refugees and things like that. It's just really beautiful, you know, and because sometimes for some of the fields you need as many hands as you can get your hands on to glean all the produce. So
yeah, and I love that you're talking about that cross mix. And I think that one of the ways that we could make that more successful is just about the scheduling. That if I start that private group glean a little earlier, so we have our circle up time, right? And then it staggers and more people come in, then we can integrate the next circle of people. So it's kind of about phasing it in a way where all of the parts can get met. But I love that. Thanks. How did you come up with the price that you're asking for the groups? Like how did you cost that out? Because we have had like volunteer groups that want to have a day that's very similar to what you're describing, but they'll say, well, we don't want to pay anything because we're already like providing work, so that should be good enough. So can you talk a little bit about that? I tell them to sign up for an open community glean. If they want, what they want to do is volunteer, they should come out and volunteer. If what they want to do is sponsor, learn, engage on a deep level over time, that's what they should do. How we came to the number of 10,000 seemed like a good number. It's high enough that it's significant for a certain size business. It's low enough that it's not a deal breaker or barrier.
Follow up real quick. 10,000 for one lead, or is that over time?
It's $10,000 sponsorship to Rachel's Table as a whole. And so it could actually be to our operational budget. It could be to Growing Gardens. We offer a sponsored gleaning day to 10,000 level sponsors of our Growing Gardens program. It's just a perk of donating $10,000 to Rachel's Table is that you get to bring your crew out. And sometimes it's family foundations also. So you might get people with their kids or like, 3 generations of a family coming out. That's just it. We don't charge on top of that. We don't charge anything for a glean ever. Yeah, no, we don't charge for glean.
I have a question from the Zoom. So the question from the Zoom is, have the farmers you partnered with had any issues with the private group gleans? as in issues with folks that have no field experience heading into their field for example?
Great question. We have not had that issue. I think in part or in sum total, because we're good at what we do. We had a quote from a farmer last year. I loved it. They said, we asked, why do you choose to partner with us? They were like, because you're highly professional, easy to work with, and you manage your people. If we didn't manage our people well, I'm sure we would have farmers who would not want to let us out. And I'm sure we have farmers who are not partnering with us already because of that, right? We also, though, are building up a reputation where we now have farmers reaching out to us, whereas before we really had to do all the outreach. But that word spreads among farmers. They tell each other who is good to work with or not. Yeah.
When you get donations from private donors, do you actually compensate farmers when you go in financially?
I'll answer your question in 1 second. I thought of one more thing here, that we also created a farmer outreach flyer, like an FAQ, that answers the questions they always want to know. Whose insurance? Ours, our liability insurance. It's not on you. How does it work? You text us, whatever, right? It's just answering those kind of key questions. And we also list on it references of other farmers who have agreed for us to list their contact information, and we're happy to chat with other farmers about what it's like to work with us. Do we compensate farmers? As of now, no. The tricky thing that we ran into was was it Laura? Was that her name this morning? Speaking to the part where once you pay volunteers, it becomes farm labor. And then we get into, labor equity stuff. We are looking, or when you pay for the produce, same issue. We are in early stages of looking at a purchase program. And when I say early, I mean very early. Anyone listening to this in the Rachel Stable world, don't worry, we're not rushing to any things. I say this to the Zoom. But in my head, I have a question of something that we do really well is bridge gaps and build relationships with these agencies. So we have formalized partnerships with over 65 agencies across 3 counties. And if we could work with farmers to find a price point where they could sell directly to the agencies at a level that supports the farm, but is discounted or wholesale or low enough that the agencies can manage it, that could be another market opportunity. Also, there are many kinds of crops that farmers aren't going to grow because if they don't have a market to sell enough of that particular Asian eggplant or that particular type of cucumber, or that particular cabbage, they're not going to grow it. But could we get them that market, could we get them that market through our partner agencies, so that even if they only grow a few rows of it, that's fine. That's enough of a crop for the agencies who want to buy it for their particular cultural constituent communities. So that's kind of my dream questions of how can we build a purchase program that supports farmers through building new markets and doesn't put the sole responsibility of fundraising all of the purchasing power on our organization because we don't have capacity for that. Yeah.
One more too.
This is from Zoom, this is just for me. How did you manage the transition from kind of doing smaller scale, maybe 6,000 pounds a year, to scaling up? What was included in that transition besides some staffing changes, and what kind of prompted that movement forward?
First, there was a big grant. And then there was Sean being my mentor. And so every month or so for about a year, I got to just think it through. And I spent probably about a year, at least 6 months, thinking it through. It was October, we got the grant, and gleaning for us that year, was that the big flood year? Our gleaning season is July through November. Actually, we have a glean coming up this month, who knew? But we had major floods one year, so we couldn't actually glean until September because the farms were just whatever. So we had many months of really being deliberate about it. And we learn to say no. Like, I don't mind saying no to people and putting a cap on how many gleans we put on the calendar, or when a farmer says, hey, we have more of this, and we're like, thanks so much for letting us know. We're actually not going to get out there. That doesn't happen very often because now we're at a point where, or earlier in that process, maybe we had fewer farm partners. And so we were able to match it. So maybe that was a key part of it, was matching the number of farms we were actively developing relationships with what our capacity was. Because if you have too many farms and you say no a lot, then they don't call you. And we want to say yes. So we've made sure to scale at a pace where we can say yes. It's a great question and probably could be a whole other session. And Sarah Bluestein, if you catch them at this conference, I think can also speak very, very confidently to that because they've been absolutely integral to building the Open Community Leading Program.